Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's my privilege today to speak on Motion 19, which stands in my name on the order paper. It is a bipartisan motion, and it reads as follows. Be it resolved that this House apologizes for more than 100 laws, regulations, and policies that were imposed by past provincial governments. Laws that discriminated against people of Chinese descent since 1871, when British Columbia joined Confederation, to 1947. These laws and policies denied British Columbia's Chinese communities basic human rights. Those include, but aren't limited to, the right to vote, the right to hold public office, the right to own property. They imposed labor, educational, and employment restrictions, subjected them to health and housing segregation, prevented them from fully participating in our society. This House deeply regrets that these Canadians were discriminated against simply because they were of Chinese descent. All members of this House acknowledge that we aspire to be a fair and just society, where people of all nations and all cultures are welcomed, accepted, and respected. Be it further resolved that the House acknowledge that the Chinese Canadian community endured untold hardships, but persevered with grace and dignity. We acknowledge that despite being subjected to discriminatory laws, policies, and practices, the Chinese community has nonetheless made and continues to make substantial contributions to our culture, our history, and the economic prosperity of our province. That is the end of the formal motion, Madam Speaker, and now I would like to read the formal apology. Today we express our sorrow and regret for historical provincial government practices that were once considered appropriate. While the governments which passed these laws and policies acted in a manner that was lawful at the time, today this racist discrimination is seen by British Columbians, represented by all members in this Legislative Assembly, as unacceptable and intolerable. We believe this formal apology is required to ensure that closure can be reached on this dark hour in our province's history. The Legislative Assembly's apology today signifies our deepest regret for the hardship and suffering our past provincial governments imposed on Chinese Canadians. The entire Legislative Assembly acknowledges the perseverance of Chinese Canadians that was demonstrated with grace and with dignity throughout our history while being oppressed by unfair and discriminatory historical laws. Moreover, we acknowledge the overwhelming contribution by Chinese Canadians to British Columbia's culture, history, and economy. On behalf of the province of British Columbia, and on behalf of this entire Legislative Assembly, we sincerely apologize for the province's historical wrongs. We are sorry for the discriminatory legislation and racist policies enacted by past provincial governments. We will ensure that this never happens again. Madam Speaker, as one of the longest-serving members of this House, you will know that this is an historic day in British Columbia for this Legislature, for the people of our province, and for those of Chinese descent who make up our province and contribute so much. And while we as Canadians and British Columbians have so much in our shared history to be proud of, there are events that we very deeply regret. the pervasive discrimination against Chinese immigration and Chinese immigrants is a stain on our history. From the First Nations to the first European settlers, Canada is a nation of people who came here to build a better life for themselves and for their children. Chinese immigrants continue to make enormous contributions to our province and our country. And those first immigrants who were made to pay to come here made some of the biggest contributions of all. They helped build the railway that connected our vast country from coast to coast. And on that great task of nation building, the Chinese laborers were given the most dangerous jobs. For every mile of track between Vancouver and Calgary, one Chinese worker died. And then, after that incredible sacrifice, the government of the day tried to limit Chinese immigration, first with a tax and then with a ban. In 2006, the Prime Minister rose in the House of Commons to offer a parliamentary apology. And here in BC, last year, we began an extensive public consultation leading to today's formal apology. We were determined that a formal apology be done properly, and that meant working with all parties. It meant creating a meaningful dialogue, hearing people's stories, allowing the people of British Columbia, especially those who were directly affected, to help direct government and the opposition in addressing this historical wrong today. I'd like to thank the members of the opposition, the third parties, and the independents. I'd like to thank all of the individuals, all of the citizens that attended the dialogue, the consultations, and that were a part of the discussion over the internet. They contributed to this process in a very meaningful way. And some of them, I'm very proud to see, are here today. We thank you for that. Thank you for setting your differences aside, recognizing that today, this historic day, and this formal apology is not about politics. It is about doing the right thing. Over 100 years later, addressing an historical wrong that is nothing less than a stain in our history. Thank you for coming together to make this happen. We cannot undo the past, but by acknowledging it, by apologizing for it, together we can ensure that we and our children learn from these mistakes and never, ever make them again. Thank you.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. I rise to speak in support of Motion 19 on the order paper today. And before I begin my remarks, I want to thank all of those who are in the galleries today. And I think that what we've just witnessed in question period and the juxtaposition of the acrimony that happens in this legislature so often has now been replaced by a genuine and sincere belief that when we work together to correct historic injustices, good things can come from the legislature of BC. And it's grateful, I am grateful to those who are in attendance today that they can see how important this issue is for all of us in this legislature today. Government members, opposition members, independent members, to stand as one in unison to recognize the absolute disgrace that has been the position that the government of British Columbia has had historically with respect to Chinese Canadians. I was born here on Vancouver Island, not far from where the first Chinese Canadians landed in 1788. with Captain John Mears. And I was born in Victoria, where the first Chinese woman landed here in 1858, and also where many thousands of Chinese Canadians settled after the completion of the CP rail in 1885. I was born in 1959, not 50 years after some of the most hateful and despicable legislation had ever been brought forward in this legislature. There was work here that took away the dignity and the rights of individual citizens, absolutely unheard of in today's contemporary Canada, with a Charter of Rights and Freedoms that we're so proud of. Absolutely despicable legislation and activities that happened right here in this chamber. When I arrived as a legislator here, I had an even more profound understanding of what it must have felt like to be a Chinese Canadian with the seat of power oppressing your very rights, denying your ability to vote, taking away your property, denigrating the work that you do, putting you at risk every day, and then denying your right to citizenship. I studied history at university, and I'm grateful for that because I have a better understanding than most Canadians of this tragedy, and I'm grateful to many scholars who have persisted in bringing these issues forward so that British Columbians and Canadians and people of the world will have a better understanding of the stain the Premier so eloquently talked about. The intent of the legislation, the motions and the reports that were brought forward over 100 years ago were bloody-minded, they were cruel, and their determination and intent was to suppress a people. Today's generation doesn't understand that. I have children, the Premier has children, many of us in this place have children. And when I look at them, they don't see color. They don't see ethnicity. They just see people. I'm grateful for that generation. But the apology that we're going to endorse today unanimously is just a first step. What we need to do is ensure that the history of these tragic events, the events that we're here to shine a light upon, continue on after today. We need to take the next step and ensure that our education curriculum says clearly and categorically that it's not all roses and sunshine when we look at the history of British Columbia and the history of Canada. There are dark moments, as the Premier articulated. Those dark moments need to be shown. If we are to grow and be better as a people, if we're going to embrace the multicultural nature of this legislature and our communities, we have to talk about the past. We have to talk about it in sorrow. And today, I believe, we can talk with pride that this generation is turning its backs on the past, turning its backs on people who sat in this place and took away the rights of a group of citizens because of their race. My kids, the Premier's son, children of other members in this place would not contemplate that. It's abhorrent to this generation, but to the generations that are represented here today in the gallery, on behalf of the official opposition, I offer you my sincere apology for the drastic actions that were taken by legislators in this place, and I give you my hope that in the future we will be able to stand together proudly and talk about the province that we can build together, a multicultural province that allows everyone the same hope and opportunity, regardless of where they came from, regardless of their political views. This is a proud day for me, it's a proud day for all of us, but it is a day long overdue for the people sitting in this chamber observing our proceedings today. To them, I offer my apology for saying that we didn't do this sooner. But to the Premier, to the government, and to the members of the opposition, Independent and New Democrat, we should be proud of what we're doing today. It's not every day that we can come to work and try, in a modest way, to redress the crimes of the past. We do that, and, Honourable Speaker, with that I'll conclude my remarks, and again, thank the Premier for bringing this forward. I also want to spend a moment to thank the member for Vancouver-Mount Pleasant, who, for our side, has been absolutely diligent on this issue since she came to this place in 1996. And to her, I offer my sincere appreciation for her work, and to all members of this House, and to the Minister for Immigration for stewarding the consultation process that many here participated in. Thank you as well. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Thank the member. Recognize the member from Vancouver-Fairview.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And like members from both sides of this House, it's an honour to be part of this legislature that is finally issuing an apology that is long overdue, that corrects actions that took place in this legislature long before any of us sat here. The truth is that in the 143 years since that British Columbia has been in existence, our province has been responsible for more discriminatory legislation and racist legislation than any other province. And that's why it is so important that we acknowledge that today and that we talk about it today. I think we know that, as in our personal lives, if we issue an apology without a change in behavior, the apology is essentially meaningless. And while much of the racist behavior of our past has been eliminated, I think we also know that even if one makes a change in behavior, if it's not acknowledged through an apology, a meaningful apology, along with the action that accompanies that apology, that something very, very important is missing in the message that we send to the people who have been wronged. It is important to acknowledge our mistakes and our wrongdoing. Chinese Canadians came to Canada. They contributed so much to this country and this province. They built Canada in a very real and a very physical way. But they also built this province in a very important cultural way. They contributed to the fabric of what we know to be British Columbia today. And without their contributions, without their presence here, we simply would not be the province that in many ways is the envy of the world. It's the envy of the world because of our natural beauty, but because of our multicultural nature. And yet, when they first came here, they came here as exploited laborers only. They were separated from their families. They were denied respect. They were denied citizenship. They were denied economic opportunity. Honorable Speaker, I remember when I was a young person in school, I studied about the history of slavery in the United States. We were taught to be appalled that that took place in the United States. We were taught that that was wrong and it had been corrected. But we didn't learn, we weren't taught about our own shameful history here in British Columbia, our history of exploiting people who came here to work and build and who were treated as little more than people whose only value was in their labor, whose lives were dispensable, and who had no rights to contribute and be part of the fabric of our society. We are acknowledging that today, and we're also committing, as the Premier said, to acknowledge that in educating the youth of tomorrow. I also learned when I was in school that people casually threw around discriminatory remarks and epithets that would be unacceptable to all of us today and are unacceptable to all of us today, but that we know still take place, and that is why education is so important. I'm a second-generation Canadian. My parents came here to escape discrimination in their home country, and yet when they arrived here, they were accepted as full citizens. They were welcome to the community. They were able to work. They participated in parent advisory committees. They had the vote once they achieved their citizenship. So I'm reminded of a friend of mine who was in the gallery today with his son. He was in the gallery today to witness this historic apology because his father was also a second-generation Canadian. And he told me a story about a conversation that he had with his father. His father was a hard-working British Columbian. He was respected by his co-workers. He participated in the community fully. He was respected by everyone who knew him. He provided for his family, but in the midst of this family discussion, a heated discussion about politics, he interjected and he said, "I've never much cared for politics or paid much attention to it because I grew up knowing that I wouldn't have the vote." He ironically turned 18 the same year that Chinese Canadians were given the vote. Honorable Speaker, not only did he grow up believing that he would be deprived of the right to participate in democracy in this country by voting, by having the same rights as every other Canadian, it affected his whole life and his whole belief about his role in this society in the future, notwithstanding the great contributions that he went on to make. And Honorable Speaker, it wasn't just he who was robbed of this opportunity. It was all of us in British Columbia who were robbed of the opportunity for him and countless others to participate fully in our community life, our community democracy. We call this the People's House, and yet it was not his house. So education about our past is so necessary for us to impact the present and to make a commitment to the future. We need to understand the roots of racism. We need to remain observant, vigilant, and active. Honourable Speaker, the Premier said this morning we will ensure this never happens again. And to ensure that this becomes reality, we need to acknowledge the truth of our past. We need to publicly acknowledge the past. But it's up to us to ensure that we guarantee a just and inclusive future for all British Columbians in the future, for everyone who participates. And that means being aware of the racism, the discrimination, and the hatred that still exist in pockets of our communities, in pockets of British Columbia, and use this lesson, this acknowledgement of our past, this opportunity to educate children in the future to ensure that we do everything we can to minimize discrimination, to minimize hatred, to minimize everything that goes against the values that we think are so important. Chinese Canadians came to British Columbia, Honourable Speaker. They came to Canada to help us build Canada. And they continue to build a vibrant, diverse, and equitable community here in British Columbia, Honourable Speaker. That's why I'm so proud to have this opportunity to stand with colleagues on both sides of this House to make this historic apology. Thank you very much.
Seeing no further speakers, the Premier closes debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is an historic day in British Columbia, and I'd like to thank all of the members from all parties in the House today for their contributions to this debate. To thank everyone for setting our political differences aside. It doesn't happen often in this legislature, but as many have said, it happens when we are united around something that we all know is the right thing to do. We cannot undo the injustices of the past. And more than that, we must never endeavor to erase them, because we have an obligation to acknowledge, confront them, and learn from them. And that is how we will move forward as a province. Create the kind of place that the member for Vancouver-Fairview talked about. The kind of place that the Minister for Tourism talked about. A place where everyone is not just accepted, but embraced, no matter where they're from. And further, we can take steps in creating that society, by creating that society, to ensure that these kinds of laws are never considered in this legislature again. And with that, I very proudly move that motion 19 and the apology contained therein be presented to this House for a vote.